I was really going back and reviewing these last 10 years, and I have concerns about how much things have really changed. I did an assessment, and year by year, let's go back to 2013. 2013, Chase had to pay out $720 million in fines to the Fed, SEC, and UK Financial Conduct Authority for failing to oversee its trading practices, including what is known as the London Whale. 2014, Bank of America agreed to a $16.5 billion settlement to the DOJ and others for misconduct related to mortgage-backed securities, and a $20 million penalty with another $727 million in consumer relief. 2015, Bank of New York Mellon, $714 million to settle claims that it defrauded customers when it promised to exchange at best rates for customers, but instead used the worst rates and pocketed the difference. 2016, Wells Fargo entered into consent orders for fraudulently opening millions of accounts in customers' names without their consent or knowledge. 2017, State Street, 7 months after installing the Fearless Girl statue, paid $5 million in back pay and interest after a Department of Labor audit found that State Street was systematically paying female employees less than their male counterparts and black executives less than similarly situated white executives. My colleague from Illinois highlighted some troubling connections between Morgan Stanley and Puerto Rico's illegal debt load. 2018, Goldman Sachs began facing lawsuits from DOJ, the Fed, foreign governments in relation to funding bribes and kickbacks to foreign officials relating to raising funds for Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund. Timothy Leissner, the Goldman Southeast Asia executive, pled guilty to various charges and forfeited $43 million. And just last month, March of 2019, Citibank fined for $25 million for violating the Fair Housing Act, for failing to offer benefits to all eligible customers, namely on the basis of race, national origin, and sex. And so I'm concerned here about the potentiality of fines related to misconduct just being incorporated as the cost of doing business. Mr. Corbett, is a cost-benefit analysis that weighs the cost of government fines versus the potential financial upside of potentially breaking the law, does that factor into controversial decision-making around misconduct at your bank?
Absolutely not.
Okay, in my district, I represent Rikers Island. I represent kids that go to jail for jumping a turnstile because they can't afford a Metro card. Do you think that more folks should have gone to jail for their role in a financial crisis that led to 7.8 million foreclosures in the 10 years between 2007 and 2016, Mr. Dimon?
I don't think people should go to jail for jumping a subway. I think we put too many people into jail, and I think if people broke the law, they should go to jail.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think that the failure to hold more people accountable for the 2008 crisis is a failure of our legal system?
Look, you have to talk to a lot of legal experts about why more people didn't, whether they deserve to, whether they broke the law, what's intent, what's not intent. But you have to talk to legal experts about that.
Here we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez grilling the CEOs of America's largest 7 banks, notably for the fact that in the aftermath of the 2008 financial collapse, only one executive from any of the major firms was prosecuted, a senior trader at Credit Suisse. Meanwhile, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon was able to settle with the DOJ out of court, and afterwards was given a 74% raise by the bank's board of directors, bringing his salary to $20 million. And clearly, given the endless slew of crimes for which these banks are constantly paying fines, outlined by AOC, they never seem to end. In fact, in the case of Dimon, weathering every storm seems to be rewarded. So it would go without saying that the punishment for these crimes is clearly light enough that it's worth the risk for these banks. I mean, these institutions are in it to make money, at any cost it seems, So if they're going to repeatedly engage in illegal activity, the risk is obviously worth it for them financially, especially if they manage to escape without getting caught. So Dimon might have bristled at even the suggestion that his bank would just factor these fines in as the cost of doing business, but when you put his assurances up against JP Morgan's role in selling garbage mortgages to investors who would ultimately lose everything in the financial crisis, it doesn't stack up well. And ironically, Dimon seemed to negate his own point in an interview with CNN earlier this week while literally talking about the Green New Deal. He said, "I don't spend much time worrying about things that I can't effectuate. Can you focus on climate change in an intelligent way that doesn't damage the economy? Yes, you can. It's called CO2 emissions taxes or trading. There's a couple of ways to do it." In other words, his solution to climate change is to levy fines against companies, that it's a, you guessed it, cost of doing business. And sure, I get it. Taxing CO2 emissions is better than nothing, and for companies that can't afford to absorb the cost, they're forced to take a cleaner approach, which is the point. But JP Morgan is a big player, and they can afford it. So while the guy is promising that he would never just take the most profitable route regardless of who it hurts and pay for it later, his plan for climate change is literally to just take the most profitable route regardless of who it hurts and pay for it later. So regardless of your opinion of AOC's politics, she's clearly looking out for the best interest of Americans as a whole here. Because when essentially no one was held accountable after there were 7.8 million foreclosures between 2007 and 2016, she's asking the right questions to make sure it doesn't happen again. And if that means that rich bank CEOs have to be held to the same standard as kids in the Bronx who hop turnstiles, then so be it.